The first one of these we did, I think maybe 2 or 3 months ago, maybe even a bit longer, with Larissa Garcia. Some of you might have been on that webinar, and Larissa talked about courageous conversations in the workplace and using the cards, which was really exciting. And then a couple of people at the end of that webinar said, "Oh, when's the next one?" And I was like, "Oh, okay, maybe we should do another one." And then based on that, when I started thinking about what we could do, like everything I've done so far over the last 3 or 4 years building this game, this deck of cards, is crowdsourcing and co-creating with people. And probably the number one question I get asked via email, face-to-face, or in the live Q&A sessions I run with people is, how do I follow up the workshop, or how do I create ongoing engagement? And yeah, I think easily by far that's probably the most common question. And I'm really excited today because we've got Lotty Roberts. She's one of our pro elephant riders, so our certified facilitators. And I see Betsy there. You're going to be joining that program soon, which is cool. And Lotty, over the last 6 months, I think, has run maybe 10 workshops, which is really, really exciting. And when we caught up for a coffee the other day, she was sharing some stories about what she does post those workshops with her clients and with those groups of people. And some of that stuff I'm not even doing with my clients and the people I'm working with. And I was like, wow, how cool would it be able to share those stories and her approach to following up workshops with people. And now Lottie's a consultant. I'm going to get you, Lottie, to introduce yourself and your amazing company in a second, but she's a consultant and she'll talk you through her approach to following up workshops. And then at the end, I'll take you or people through one more example, which for those who've been on a masterclass, you'll have seen this example, but I wanted to share it wider again and share one more story about how people are using it. So yeah, I want to introduce now Lottie. I will leave it up to you from here on out unless there's questions, and I'll interject at time. But Lottie, the floor is yours really to share your story with everybody about following up workshops.
Cool, thank you. Hopefully everybody can hear me and I'm not on mute. So my background is primarily change. I've been working in change and in a leadership role for probably just over 20 years, up until a couple of years ago when I started my own business, but also in like transformation and delivery. So as much as I love change, I'm all about like getting it to stick, like getting things to, it's all very well to have an idea and an intention. And what I noticed particularly in projects is when a project team steps away, the change quite often doesn't stick. And I think this is something that with the emotional culture deck, you can get a lot of excitement. But then once you step away, or if you're a facilitator within your own company that's doing it, it's very easy for people to lose that momentum. So I've kind of used some of the approaches that I guess some of the psychology that I use from a change point of view to look at the follow-up. So I'll just crack on. I won't really say my company's called Mind You. You can look me up on LinkedIn. You don't really want to hear about that stuff. You want to hear about the follow-up. So that's what I'm going to talk about. I've just put this quote on the first slide because I really think this is, I guess, kind of a motivation behind why I'm looking more into what happens after the initial workshop. Because I think the initial workshop, to be honest, is kind of the easiest bit because it's funky, it's cool. You use some cards and you have some discussions in the workplace that you weren't necessarily having before. But you still have to do something differently. And so this quote of our dilemma is that we hate change, but we love it at the same time. What we really want things to stay the same in a nice way. The best things stay the same, but just get better. And so we basically want things to change, but we don't really want to have to do anything, and because we're really busy. So what I've been trying to do is make it as easy as possible for people to make things happen and to really think about what they need to do when they walk away, so that the essence of the emotional culture work sticks and starts to become part of how they be, really. So I like to say one cool workshop does not a change make, and that doesn't take anything away from the fact that it is a cool workshop and it is a cool tool, but what happens next. So let me just... So the kind of things that I'm going to go through. So I'm going to talk about why I think the follow-up session is just so important. the key objectives and outcomes from my perspective that we're trying to get out of the session, and then all things to do with timing in terms of when you run it after the initial one and how long, etc. You can tell I'm a typical change person. Why, what, how, when. It's what change people do. And how. So really the most of the time is going to be spent in top tips. So how to run the session. And then kind of where to and by who is the next bit. So that's the kind of stuff I'm going to cover today. I do go down wormholes sometimes, so I've got my watch here, so hopefully I'll keep to time. Before we go on though, I guess what I want to say is this is just my perspective on it. This is just one way of doing it. What I hope is it will inspire you to bring your own way of doing it, which may be different. You don't need to necessarily follow my top tips, but it might spark some ideas of how you can run yours. But if you do want something prescriptive, I've even put my agenda of what I do in here. But I'm really also keen to hear from other people about what they do, because I think that cross-pollination of ideas is what makes something better. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't necessarily think this is perfect. I think it's a start. I think together we can just continue to evolve this and make it better. And I'm not quite as funky on PowerPoint as Jeremy, so just please do excuse any of my basic PowerPoint skills as we go on. So why should we do it? Why is it so important? And it is, I think that the first one, it kind of is the spark. And I have written an article on LinkedIn, which is basically what I'm talking about here. So if you have to jump off early, you can go on to that. But I talk about the first workshop being the spark that kind of ignites in people in the workplace why it's important to focus on emotional culture, what it is, and then start to have some really, really good conversations outside of the norm of, everyday business as usual life, which we all will have come across if we've done any of these workshops. The undesired feelings, overwhelm, anxiety, it tends to be, I don't know about you, but it's been in every single one of my workshops as in the top 5. So you've got them having this great workshop to start with, but then they go back and that fire can go out. So the second workshop really is about giving the kindling and wood to keep that fire burning, okay? Great change, facilitating great change is about not doing the work for them. I always say, I don't want to be crack cocaine for the business. I want for them to be able, motivated and able to just keep themselves going. So you're creating action and ownership. If I was going to say one big thing you want to get out of this second workshop is like action and ownership, because it won't be there after the first one. I never ever go through critical actions on the first workshop. I just find people are so tired at the end. It's a great workshop because it's so interactive, but it's tiring. There's a lot of energy that has to go into it. So by the time you get to the part which is about making it sticky, emotionally, and they're just gone. They're just tired. Doesn't matter how good a facilitator you are, they are energetically tired. So the second one, it creates those actions when you can really focus on the action. There's the opportunity to check in and have time to reflect. So you've had a month for it to settle down and for people to start to notice what's different and what's come up. It's like if you, watch a good movie and it finishes and you sometimes, it keeps, there's something about it that keeps in your mind. It keeps bringing up themes or reflecting. And I think this workshop brings up a lot of stuff over the next few weeks, which means you get to really focus on that in the follow-up, keeps the energy going, the momentum going. And really it's about facilitating that positive change to stick. So this is where you are, providing the glue for them to really put this into their business as usual operation. Because it's so easy for them to go back to the same old, with change, quite often what really makes people start to change is that the pain of not changing becomes bigger than the pain of changing. And it's so easy to forget that. So what you're wanting them to do is remind them that you don't want to go up to the same old, and then get them thinking about what the fruits of their labor might actually give them, all that desired feeling stuff, what that's actually going to give them, how it's going to manifest. For some people, you know, reminding them that it might be, you know, bottom line figures, absenteeism, but for others, it might just be an inner feeling of whatever their individual feelings are, start to, you know, that what they've said, their desired top feelings individually, that might be enough of a motivation to get them to do something different. But it's hard for them to hear because, as I said earlier, overwhelmed tends to be the biggest thing that I see in the emotional culture workshops, but just in all my other workshops. Overwhelmed. You know, I'm working on something called Thriving Leader at the moment because I see the light go out in a lot of people's eyes because they're so overwhelmed with what's going on, in terms of, you know, more expectations. They're always tuned into some social media or something. They're in the matrix. So the thought of having some extra stuff that they need to do is hard to hear. And I reiterate this messaging in the communication I do following the follow-up, because I'll tell you about that later. But to say the purpose of doing this follow-up is not to give them extra stuff to do, but it's actually about doing stuff that lightens their load, that makes things easier. Okay, it's not an extra task on their to-do list. It's almost helping them think about what they don't do. Is this all making sense as I'm going through? Hoping so. It's hard when people aren't talking and I can't see notes, and so I'm hoping no one's dozed off yet. So when it comes to the top objectives, I've put, like in asterisk capital letters, clarify and agree top critical actions. Honestly, they're like a bucket full of eels slippering around, not wanting to have action stick to them. But this is what's going to make the emotional culture work actually start to manifest in a positive way. And I'll tell you about how I go about doing the actions, because I've got a specific way how I do that. Further strengthen the team culture, because we can continue the conversation through them bringing their know their self handbooks, which is what I ask them to bring to the sessions. I'm happy to share the comms I send out pre-workshop and post-workshop. They're just my way of doing it. I've templated it now, but they might again spark ideas. And then agree the emotional canvas. So what I tend to do after the first one is, because I'm an external facilitator that comes in, I take the canvas away and I make it look all pretty, as you'll see on the side, with all the little post-its that I type up. Now the first ones I actually used to hard copy type them, but I don't now, because I really encourage them to have the emotional canvas as a part of their visual management that's very interactive. So these post-its shouldn't get dusty. They should chop and change quite regularly. But they really love it when you bring this canvas back. So I do a little kind of stand around, get them to look at that. Really kind of, it's about them accepting it. Does this look right? After a month, is this still good? And then confirm where to from here. So the next steps, which would follow on. So again, it's so easy for them to think, we've done the follow-up now, we're done. It's like, this is never done. The work is always happening. You know, and that's the same with anything. So if you want to have sustainable change, you're always going to have to do something. It never ever finishes. It's continuous. So I put at the bottom, be intentional but fluid. So be intentional with what you want to achieve out of the follow-up, but be really fluid, because people may come in with some stuff that they really want to dig down on, and you need to make a call as a facilitator yourself of whether that's worth prioritizing. So when it comes to timings, I run it a month later. I'm reasonably strict about that, because I think if you do it any shorter, there hasn't been time for people to really digest what they've gone through in the first one. If you do it any later, then you've really lost so much momentum, it's hard to jimmy them up again. So what I do to try and ensure that the follow-up is booked in is I actually book it in at the same time when I book it in the initial one. So when people come to me to do an emotional culture workshop, I sell it as a package. I actually say as well, if you do the two, you get a discount to really kind of make them realize, because they're like, why would I only just have one? Why can't I just have one? Because again, people just want to be in and out really quickly. So if you can book them both in together, you're more likely to get the time of a month later, because real estate in people's diaries is really hard. And then I book in 2 hours for the session. When I initially started these off, I did 90 minutes and it's not enough. So book in 2 hours. If it takes less, then you're giving people back the gift of time. And I've got quite passionate lately about energy and time and how our brains work. So if I can avoid running a workshop between 1 and 4, I will go out of my way to do it, because people they are literally out to lunch mentally in that time zone. So you're less likely to get them really invested. So I know it's not always easy, but that's just a tip from me. And we're going to go on to the how. So there's going to be a few slides on the how, because this is kind of all my tips. So this is where I'm going to probably spend a bit more of my time. So this is an example agenda. As I said, it's just how I roll most of the time. I won't necessarily use this all the time, because I will do a chat with the person that I'm dealing with in terms of the workshop, my point of contact, around, is there anything that's come up? It's always good to say, like, has anything come up? Have you had any questions? The other thing that's really useful for me is I always send out a survey post the first workshop, and I see a lot of trends in that from that group. And I will, when I'm planning the follow-up, I'll look at those trends to see stuff that I can bring in. Because with these workshops, with them being very interactive, one of the things that I've found that really helps people see, because it is, the first one as a facilitator, it's a bit of a breeze in a way, because you're just really guiding them through. But the second one, you do need to do a lot more work. But I will look through the trends, and I might drop little insights in as they're doing the work, just little bits of information or knowledge or a top tip or a quote that supports or helps them in some of the comments that they've given me in the feedback of the first one. Does that make sense? Because I start to see some trends or some concerns. So, they love the little quotes. That's sometimes the stuff that they really remember. And it just really, I guess, just adds and enhances around the whole of the emotional culture deck and what it is. It sticks in their memory more. So the agenda is, the start is the bright spots check-in. So I actually use the bright spots handout as a little bit of inspiration for that. I get them to basically, the two things I ask them is, over the last month, did anybody help you feel one of your top feelings? Which I think is from that bright spots. It's right, isn't it, Jeremy? Yeah. And then the other one is, did anybody help you, support you, or, do something when you were having one of your undesired feelings? And that normally brings up some good conversations. I also say, like, if you can't think of either of those, has anything just come top of mind that might have happened differently, or that you noticed change as a result of the first workshop? Depending on the size of the group, I'll get them doing that in pairs or in small groups. So quite often I'll start in pairs, because people that are socially anxious feel much more comfortable if they're just in pairs at the start of the workshop to warm them up. It's just something that I've noticed. Then the next bit, I will get them to share an insight from the handbook. So again, with this agenda, I always prepare people what to expect with a follow-up, so they never come in blind. So I send this out beforehand. I make sure that they come in with their Know Yourself handbook. But I always have a plan for if they don't as well, because a lot of people don't do homework. And out of the Know Yourself handbook, what I ask them to do is share a couple of things that you think is really important that people should know about you, or that you think they don't know about you. They might be the same or they might not. But basically, it's getting people to share something about themselves that's going to help people understand them better. That's the idea of it. Then we review the canvas. So we stand around the canvas. They will have a look at it. Sometimes they'll add something or take something off. And then we get on to the bit that takes up the most time, which is the actions, which I will go on to next. So this is all my top tips for running the session, but to be honest, it's really focused around the action planning, because as I said, that's your number one thing that you want to come out with, is being able to fill out that middle section, the critical actions. We're aiming to only get about 5. I always say 5 plus or minus 2, but 5 really is the magic number, particularly when people just don't, if they take more away, they're quite often not going to do it. To help them with the action planning, one of the things I do when I'm going through the notes is I start of the first workshop, I start to look at themes coming through. So the themes that come through tend to be quite similar, but not always the same. So there's quite often a theme around communication or collaboration. Presence is another one, and as a mindfulness-based stress reduction teacher, that's something I'm pretty passionate about, and I know this is, quite lacking in the workplace. So presence and listening tends to be another one. Having fun is another theme that comes up quite regularly. Building resilience is another one. And what other ones come up? There's one around leadership quite often. I can send that. Accountability, actually. Accountability and prioritization is another one. Yeah, accountability, ownership is another theme. So when you look through there's a lot of stuff that comes out of the first workshop. And again, because I'm a facilitator, this is a service I'm providing, I take that away and I, type it up and look at it on the canvas and everything. But it's really, you see common themes. So what I will do is when I send out the notes after the first one, I will say, these are themes I've seen coming through. But as a team, can you meet and see if these themes are the themes that you agree with? And I would say 50% of the people do it. They actually sit around and they go, yeah, and they add or they change them. But some won't, but you've got those themes as a foundation. So I bring them into the follow-up and I go, do these themes look right? Because we're going to do our critical action planning around these themes. Again, probably just 5, not too many themes. And then I get them into groups, depending on the size of the group. And a lot of the ones I run tend to be around 16 to 20 people. So I'll get them into, it works out quite nicely to have one group per theme. So I'll have like a station for each theme. So you'll have, and this is a really good way as well of getting them not just sitting all the time. So you'll have a table that's maybe accountability, or maybe have a table that's communication, whatever the one is for your group. And then I ask the groups, they've got basically 5 minutes to come up with one action for that theme. Okay, so just one action. So that's easy, right? So you're not overwhelming them. One action. If they're feeling really enthusiastic and full of ideas, 2 is fine. But then what you'll have to do, so you've got 5 groups, maybe on 5 teams. So this is why I say it's a lot more, as a facilitator, you've got to be a lot more in there. I'll go in and check, because what they'll do is they'll get really woolly on the actions. I don't know if you've noticed how woolly the actions are in the first one. That's when I realized, like, there's no way you can do critical action planning in the first workshop. So I go around, and this is where I say I play bad cop, because they've had like all sweet Lottie up to now, that's fun and cracking jokes and all of this and getting them laughing. But I'm like, that's not an action. No, that's not an action. This is an action. When are you going to do it? What does it mean? I've got no clue what that means. So I really push them on it. I'm like, if I brought somebody from the room next door in, would they have any idea what that action is? Probably not. I kind of play bad cop in a kind of nice, like, funny way, So, yeah. And so they kind of get it, I'm like, would that person have any clue? They probably wouldn't. So this is where SMART comes in. I just find it's just something that everybody is usually heard of, and you go, make it specific, how would you measure it? Is it achievable and realistic? Like, people love to go for these massive actions that like programs of work, which is why they never do it. Something can have a massive impact and be a really easy thing to do. So I ask if it's realistic, and also what the time frame is. And I think my background in delivery has really helped here, because I'm like, I want an action plan out of this. This is what we're aiming for, that you can take this away And it's actually, you've made it easy for you. It's hard now, but you've made it easy for yourself to really know what you need to do. So 1 action per team. And then every 5 minutes, they move to the next station and they have to come up with an action on that station. And then they move to the next one. So each group has come up with an action on each theme. So you have roughly 5 actions per theme. Yeah. Does that make sense to everybody? It's hard when I'm not articulating, but I'm not showing. I'm quite a visual person, so I don't know if people are the same.
You're getting the thumbs up from some people. So.
Right. I'm a thumbs up person. So the next step is, see, I work in analog a lot as well. So I don't go for the fancy voting on your phone because I don't trust technology enough. I'm like, oh, it's just an extra thing as a facilitator for me to worry about if it doesn't work. So I have my sticky dots and I say, right, now what we're going to do as a group is we're going to vote. You got 5 dots each, you got 5 votes. You can use your votes how you want. If there's an action there that you're like, this needs to happen, you can put 5 dots on it. So people they get quite strategic then. It's quite funny. Some of them like hold back and see where people are putting their votes. It's the same with the first workshop when they're voting. And so they vote. And I count up count up the votes, and the ones with the top 5 with the most votes are their actions. But I'll run through them and I'll go, did these sound right? And somebody might go, oh, I think we could take 1 more, you know, and so then they might have 6. Yeah. And then I'm like, who's going to own them? Who's going to own these? I always go for more than 1 owner. I think it's unfair for 1 person to come away, particularly because you've got more than 5 people in the workshop. So I ask for people this is the tumbleweed moment because it's never normally go up as quickly as you'd like. But once the first person has volunteered for an action, then it normally gets a little bit easier. So yeah, so we put the owners on them. So we then are at that point, we've got 5 actions, 5 or 6 actions, very specific. I read them out again. I see if they sound right. What I would say as well, you don't necessarily have, the votes don't necessarily go 1 action per theme. You might find that they're huddled around a theme. But what I will do is if there's some themes that are like Norman no mates left and have got no votes, I'll go, this came up as a theme very clearly in your workshop, your first workshop. Are you just not going there because you're a little bit scared of the work? You know, I think sometimes something that can cause great pain or frustration in the workplace, it gets to that point because it's just too difficult to deal with. And we love to turn away from difficult stuff. I use a lot of my mindfulness stuff in the workshop. So I'm like, but the thing is, it doesn't go away and it gets bigger. So how are you going to face into it? And when I pose that question to them, quite often there will be a little bit of a shift because sometimes they're just taking the easy option. And so I will question them on that. Are you just taking the easy option? And just remind them again of, you know, some of the comments that came up in the first workshop. Then I will get those, once we've got those critical actions agreed, then I will say, right, we have a canvas, you know, how do we bring this to life? And this is where I'll start to sort of say, has anybody thought over the last month of what ideas you've got of bringing this to life? Now, there's so much that Jeremy's given us already. You're never going to get to cover it in this workshop. The action planning will take up a lot of time. But I get them just to spend like 5 minutes brainstorming some ideas of how they could bring it to life. And I will, because I think it's really important it's their ideas. Like you can, if they're really like struggling, I'll help them. But I really want it to come from them. So some of the ideas that come up, aside of some of the ones that are already there, are as part of the accountability and decision making, it's quite often because they don't have a clear kind of planning or rhythm. And so that quite often comes out as an action. So it's like adding we've got some people that have put in what's called a 12-1 rhythm. I don't know if you've heard of it. I help a lot of my clients with it. It's like you work on a quarterly basis. You have 12 weeks. that you work, and 1 week that's retrospective and planning. So the idea is, what do you want to achieve in the next 12 weeks? What's the biggest priorities? How are we going to plan that out? I actually get the emotional canvas work built into that. So they actually have some stuff around their emotional culture actions is part of their priorities for the 3 months. We like to go into more technical priorities, but I actually start to get people thinking about, how do you make some of these not so touchy, you know. I think because some of the emotional culture stuff, people find it's not something they can see and touch. It's not something they're delivering. So what I'm trying to do is get them to visualize how that manifests, and then how they can add that as actions into their workload. So it's a BAU thing. It's like something they always check in on. Does that make sense? So yeah, so it's getting them to put it into stand-ups, to operating rhythms, things like that. We've got people doing things like, what does a good day at work look like? And they use their emotional culture as very much part of that. They have, I've got a list of stuff which I just collate. I just keep building on it, because people do come up with some really great ideas, some really cool ideas. So where to from here? So I get confirming the critical actions, providing the extra ideas to keep it alive, and then really reiterating. I go on my change monologue rampage for a couple of minutes saying, you know, the work is never done. Okay. You have to keep, if you think this is important, and I'll say, you know, put your hands up if you think this is important work, not just to appease me, I've got thick skin, put your hands up. The whole room puts their hands up pretty much. You might have, you know, I don't think there's ever been anyone that's not put their hand up. And I'll go, so to keep this going, you have to do work. I said, like you do with anything, if you want to have a great relationship, you have to work at it. If you want to be a good parent, you have to work at it. If you want to keep fit, you can't just get fit, then stop doing all the work. You have to keep working. I said, it's the same with this. And then I do remind them that it is about making their life easier. Okay, so this is not about extra stuff. I really reiterate this in my communication after. You know, it's not about having extra stuff to do. And I'll follow that up with an email a couple of days later. And then this is a quote that I love, and I use it quite often towards the end of the workshop. But I say, look, it's not the load that breaks you down, it's the way you carry it. We go to work. We get given stuff, you know, life is work as well, okay? But just because it's work doesn't mean it has to be a heavy burden. It's how you carry it. So to me, why the emotional culture stuff is so important is because it's about turning that load into something that you feel motivated to carry and is a purpose, and that you could carry in a lighter way, or can be weighing you down, and you can be feeling all of those undesired feelings and focusing on those undesired feelings. You know, it's another quote I love is, tell me what you focus on, I'll tell you who you are. And that's I think this emotional culture work, are you going to focus on your desired feelings? You know, are you going to focus on where you want to get to? They're not just fluffy blue sky stuff. So I use that at the end. Normally resonates with most people. They actually quite often ask me for that quote after, so I'll send it in the follow-up. I just feel like I've just talked without, because when you're a facilitator, people are talking back at you. So I'm hoping that was useful in some way, but like I say, take it as some kind of inspiration for you to get creative. And really, I'm just keen to hear any thoughts, questions, if that made sense.
Yeah, amazing, Lottie, amazing. I know it does seem strange when you're just talking at a screen and you can't see people's reactions, right? It's a bit unnerving, yeah. But I can assure you there were thumbs up and people nodding heads and smiling and leaning into the screen, which I hope means that people are finding it useful. There was a couple of questions that came up earlier on, but I thought I'd wait till the end here to ask them on behalf of Steve and Gail. So Gail's first question was, what's in the post-workshop #1 survey? So what do you have in that survey, Lottie?
The survey, I can send out the questions. Okay. If you just one moment, caller, I'll bring it up and I can actually tell you them now. So just do it on Survey Monkey.
Okay, yeah. And what sort of things are you surveying for? Like, what are you trying to find out?
So I'm trying to find out, one, did they find it engaging? Do they think it's going to help them in their role?
Yeah.
Do they think that it was like useful? Because I think they're different things. Sometimes a workshop can be useful, but they're finding it useful on an individual level, but they don't necessarily. It's interesting. Some people find it individually useful, but they don't think it's useful for their job. It's they're not always the same. Mm-hmm. I asked how they found me as a facilitator. I asked what was the thing that they took away, the biggest thing they took away. What did they like most? What did they find a struggle or like least? And do they have any other comments? So it's pretty standard survey stuff. Nice. Gold is always in the comments, I find, but it does give really good general trends as well. And would they recommend other people to do this workshop? I always put that in as well.
Nice. My gut feeling is that you're doing that as a consultant, but if you are working inside an organization, so you're a team member of the company, there's no reason why you couldn't ask those very similar questions to get feedback on your own facilitation inside the company and what people liked about it, etc.
I think it's essential because you just can't. Sometimes if somebody's facilitated, they'll probably know the stereotypical person that sits at the back of the room and you cannot read. You don't know if their mind is somewhere else, they're bored stiff or whatever. And I normally think, they're just bored. And then they come out with some comments like they've been taking it all in and they love it, but you've got no idea. I call them awkward turtles, the people. It's the same with change. I always say you've got the cheerleaders, those, you active resistors, those. Yep. You've got these awkward turtles in the middle. You've got no idea what they're thinking. They might love it or they might hate it.
Yeah. That reminds me of a conversation I had recently around cynical people in the workplace. And when we're going through any change or we're trying to encourage change, often we look to target the cynics and we look to go, well, only if we could convince the cynics or the people, the people who don't care, only if we can target those people and get them to care more. And the funny thing is that if you've got cynics, we should be actually targeting the cynics because the cynics care enough to vocalize their cynicism, which means that they care. It's the apathetic people that we should be less concerned about because people who don't care, we're never going to be able to move them to caring. But I think let's focus less on apathy. The people who are apathetic and focus more on the cynics and then the bright spots, the people who are champion change and focus on those two ends rather than the people in the middle.
Yeah, well, I take a little bit of a different stance on it because I think psychological safety has a big part to play in that. Some people aren't saying what they're feeling because they don't feel safe enough to do it. So it all depends what's going on. So you've got some people that just love the sound of their own voice and love to have a good whinge. But you got some people, and don't get me wrong, I love active resistors because you know exactly what they're thinking. You could do something with it, and an active resistor can quite often become your biggest cheerleader if you listen to them. But there is a huge chasm of people in the middle, as I said, the awkward turtles. They might love it, they don't tell you. They might hate it, they don't tell you. They might be just meh either way. So it's like, how do you, and that's where you've got to go in and have the conversations. So I love getting into the awkward turtles, which I know should probably have a better name, but I just still call them the awkward turtles.
Yeah, it works. Nice. And Steve's question was, where is it, Steve? You're asking about the tracking canvas. Do you use the tracking canvas during the month between the first and the second workshop?
I haven't. No, I haven't. I do keep in touch with conversations with them. I think probably just for me, because there's so many tools, what I'm trying to do is get really familiar with certain ones and then kind of add to them. And also the other thing is I'm just really aware with overwhelm and anxiety, but anxious being the two big things, giving them too much stuff. So I try to keep it simple. Yeah.
Nice, yeah. Building on that though, I know of two companies, or not companies, organizations, government agency teams at the moment, Steve and everybody else who are using this tracking canvas. And so just in case people aren't aware of what this thing is, I'll just share my screen and bring this up so everybody can see it. But
I'll just unshare mine.
It's okay, Lottie. It's Jill sharing. I'm hoping people can see this. And the people who've been on the masterclass will have come across this. It started with a conversation with one of our pro elephant riders at Air New Zealand, but we're talking about how we could get a really high snapshot, simple snapshot, high level of where the team sit. And so this example, the team came up with these 6 things that as a team, they think are most important to their success. And he was doing this on a quarterly basis. So getting the team to come and put a dot, 1 not feeling it, 5 feeling it a lot. I think it might have been the other way around. Don't quote me on that. It could have been the other way around, but you get the idea around the spectrum there. And so what I ended up doing, and this is in the toolkit, in the Emotional Culture Deck toolkit, I ended up creating or designing a template that you could use based on what Jakob and I had come up with. And you put your feelings for what the team come up with in here. You could add a sixth. And then instead of it being 1 not feeling it, 5 feeling it, at the time I've been doing some reading around emotions and how we track them and data. And there was a quote in the paper that said, it's not natural to numerically index how you feel. And so we moved away from 1 and 5, and we made it red, not feeling it, green, feeling it a lot, and orange, amber in the middle. And this was me in a workshop recently here in Wellington where the team had come up with their top 5. This was actually a professional, semi-professional cricket team, so a sports team, and what they wanted to feel in their team environment for the upcoming season. And then I just used post-it notes, and they got them to put a post-it note of where they sat on the spectrum. Now, there's some obvious disadvantages and biases that occur here. Groupthink. If somebody starts putting in post-it note here, everybody will be drawn to that. So there's some obvious things that need to be overcome, but it's just a good nudge to get people to start thinking about where they are in relation to what the team has said, and then also a good nudge to get people to be more open and sharing in the group rather than just behind closed doors, so to speak. So I do know of 2 government agencies, and I'm using it with my teams that are using us on a monthly basis at the moment. And then the cool thing is, one of those teams, then they take the one they consider the low score, so to speak, and then once a month they then do what you said there, Lottie, using your idea, where they get together in smaller teams and then decide what's one thing we can do this upcoming month to help us improve that, help us feel more as a group of that thing, of that feeling. And so there's a lovely ongoing cadence to that. And they're in their 6th month of doing that. Yeah. So they've got a top 6, and they've ended up doing 1 a month. They started with the lower score, and then they've just cycled through it. And it got me thinking about something that Patrick Lencioni talked about, which you can, I think the quote's here, you might be able to see the screen, I don't know, but he talks about that. He's heard claims that employees won't believe what leaders are communicating to them until they've heard it 7 times. I'm not sure where he's come up with this number, but Lencioni's done all this.
I've actually heard 10 is the one I've heard.
Well, he goes on to say whether the real number is 5, 7, or 27 or 77, it doesn't really matter. More, he says, the point is that people are skeptical until they're skeptical until they're told about it consistently over time. And there's pros and cons to that, obviously, if the message isn't the right one. But it got me thinking about how many sessions using the Emotional Culture Deck or having these conversations is the sweet spot before it becomes a norm for the team and before it becomes a default mode rather than just something you do in a workshop. And my hypothesis based on, and this is a very small sample size, so take that into account, but people I know are using it consistently. And it would seem that 6 or 7 of these sessions, not the full session, but the ongoing check-in moments, seem to be about a turning point where there was one example from a client who I was chatting with yesterday who said that they've gone through this 6 times and these follow-up sessions, and they said they had a moment in a team meeting the other day where a girl was crying in the session because of what was happening around the team, but she came to the leader of the team afterwards and said, I wouldn't have felt comfortable crying and expressing how I felt 6 months ago, but because we've been going through this process, I feel safe. And I feel like it's normal to express this because we've been talking about how we want to feel and not feel this whole time.
Yeah, all
of a sudden there was a switch.
I had an example the other day. One of my clients had they had somebody that had been off with severe depression, and nobody had any idea. And then was on the workshop, and after the workshop actually went up and says, this has been so helpful for me because I now feel I can have a conversation in the workplace about how I'm feeling rather than it build up, and then I need to take 3 months off.
Yeah, wow.
Which is pretty amazing. And just one thing I was going to add. So there's a company that I just started working with that now put all of their, they're a small company, they've got 60 people, but they've just put everybody through it. So we did that over 4 workshops, and they have what they call a tank every month, and they're starting to do just what you were saying, like having conversations, and the canvas is very much a part of their workplace now. But one of the things they're doing, which is a little bit different from the tracker, is, but it does also get around a little bit of the group think, is rather than they have got their feelings up there because the canvas is there, but they've kind of got like a feeling of the day, kind of like, so it's they've got a huge sort of kitchen that's on, they've got a funky like workspace that's everybody's got this big kitchen in the middle, and so they've got post-its by it, and they just write the emotion of the day and they just stick it up on there.
Nice.
And so whatever it is, it doesn't have to be one that is on their top feelings.
Yeah.
But what that's starting to do is kind of add to the collage and show the transient nature of emotions as well, which is really important, and adding to that kind of emotional literacy in the workplace. So it's a little bit different to the tracker,
yeah, sure.
But what it does get over the group think. You get some very interesting words that come on there. For sure. Yeah. So that's just something else. It kind of is just getting people really in touch and feeling safe enough to express it.
Nice. Simone's got a great question. She said, could you do this tracking canvas digitally to get around groupthink? And 1000% you can. We're actually building that. We're at very early version 2 of a prototype of building that. So eventually all these things that we've got in the lo-fi world, apart from the cards themselves, because I've got some beliefs around them staying tangible in the real world, but the ongoing follow-up stuff becoming a digital thing that you can work with your teams and start to track. So I mean, it's still a wee way away. We're at version 2. When we've got a version ready to share with all of you people, I'll definitely do that. But we're working on that. One other lo-fi thing I'd love to share with you, which I said I'd share at the start, is something I've been working with some teams recently. One of those teams was a professional rugby team here in New Zealand, and another is a corporate team. But it's this idea, I'm calling it, sorry, forgive that it's upside down at the moment, but it's called a check-in handbook. And teams are using this in a one-to-one environment with their leaders and their employees. And what we're doing is checking in on the desired feelings of each person, human in your team, and the undesired. So my top 5, well, I'll just give you top 3 to start with, are inspired, free, and brave. Those are the top 3 things I want to feel in my work that I need to be feeling to be successful. And what you can then do is insert frequency, weekly, fortnightly, monthly, whatever it might be, then circle how often you felt it recently, from not often to always. And then there's an ideal state question. And this is, how often do you think you should feel this feeling at work to be effective? And there's a slight difference between those two, obviously, because one of my top 3 are free, but I don't always need to be feeling free to be effective. In fact, I actually need, because if I'm always laissez-faire, then don't have any constraints and any barriers around me. So I only need to be feeling it almost always to be effective. And you'd work your way through ideal state, and then you can look at the difference between the two. And where I think it gets really fascinating is when it comes to our undesired feelings and how we can help reframe this. So my number 1 feeling, I don't want to feel at work, but I might from time to time, is anxious. And now at the moment, I'm actually only usually feeling it because my week is relatively free this week of major commitments, apart from this one. So I'm feeling it usually. But the second question is, how often do you think you should feel this feeling to be effective at work? And now I almost always need to be feeling anxious to be doing great work, because I know I'm pushing myself out of my comfort zone and scaring the shit out of myself. And so this question here, I think, is a really interesting way to help your people reframe what they're experiencing and how they relate it to their work. And so that canvas there is now uploaded into the toolkit, the Emotional Culture Deck toolkit. So if, lots of people in this, watching this or in this now, will have access to that. If you don't, get the toolkit and you can get access to that, and just print it off and you fold it up into an A4 like the rest of the tools that you would have played around with. And teams are having great success with just using that as a one-to-one, a little check-in. I've been using it. We've just got we've hired somebody to help me out. Sorry about that. We've just helped somebody to help me out, and we do that on a Monday morning together. And it's a cool way just to see how we've been going over the past week. Yeah, so just 2 more things, Lottie, that I want to just recap from you, because it was amazing. And thank you so much for being so generous. And somebody even said that. Thanks for being generous with sharing your experiences and your lessons. It's amazing. And I'm hoping it's part of the community we're building, right, where people want to be open and share this stuff so we can all learn from each other, because you're doing even more amazing stuff than I'm doing. And there'll be people out there watching this who are doing even cooler stuff as well. And we'd love to hear your stories eventually. But the thing that I love the most, apart from all of it, but the thing I love the most, my critical takeaway was that your canvas that you send back to them, you don't type that up and you keep the post-it notes on it. And I absolutely love that. The idea that it's not a finished article, it's something that is an organism that's changing, and it's such a symbol of that rather than it being cemented to the wall with typed up writing on it. So that's cool. I'm going to steal that idea if you don't mind, because I absolutely love that.
I will tell you something. I'll confess, because I'm a bit OCD. I do, because they're all really messy, the post-its after the first workshop. So I do rewrite them so that they're all neat. But, and also because as people will know that some of the post-its from that first one, I mean, like they're not very legible sometimes.
I bet, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so I have I've got somebody that's just started that helps me with that. I know it's probably not very, you know, environmentally friendly, the amount of post-its I use, and I do think it looks so pretty though.
yeah, nice. And then the final one is you talked about how in your workshops overwhelmed is one that comes up a lot, and that may or may not be common across the board depending on where people are in the world, what industries you're working in. There'll be so many variables in that, but that very point, and it was around the time we've been talking about this, got me thinking, imagine if we could collect all the data, all the data from the workshops and start to look at those trends across industries, across teams, across countries, across team sizes. And so we've been working on a version, a very lo-fi version of collecting that stuff. And I thought I'd just quickly share it so people get an idea of it, and then you might want to contribute to this and be part of what we're building. But it sort of came off the back of a company of 500 people I've been working with across 2 countries, 23 or 24 teams, and they ran a workshop with all of those 23 teams. And I was like, I wish we had a way to collect all the data that came from it. And what I've ended up doing is working with somebody here to create that way. And I'll just give you a quick snapshot of this. So over 23 workshops, we ended up coming up, dissecting all that data and coming up with the top 10 for what they wanted to feel and the top 10 for what they don't want to feel. And we even broke it down by teams or business units, right? Business A, I've removed the names here just for anonymity, but this business was in New Zealand, this business was in Sydney, and this business was in New Zealand and Auckland. Only one team, they had 12 teams, I think they had 10 teams. And we did it for Undesired. So we were able to break down what the teams have said they wanted to feel and not feel. The commonalities, confidence and ported, was across all of the teams generally. Overwhelmed, funnily enough, Lotty was one was high up for this business as well. And that's the way we then were able to replay back to the senior leadership team who oversee the 3 business units about what was going on. And so what we've ended up doing is, because I'm hoping, Lottie, you'll be able to nod to me. Can you see this form that we've got here? Does it move to
Yeah.
And so we've designed a form that, if you're up for it, I'll share this with people after this webinar, and you can feel free to add your own workshop data into it. But you can input your workshop date, your team size, your organization size, your industry, the organization type, not-for-profit, etc., the country. And then you can drop in a drop-down box, you can tick what feelings have come up in your workshops. So what the desired feelings, then the undesired feelings. And then if you want to, the hope is that if you put a team name and organization name down, bear in mind that all this data is yours. It's not ours. It's yours. We're just collecting it, and it's going to be owned by you. It's open to you. We'll delete it whenever you want it to be. But if you were to put a team name or organization name down, we can then segment that data for you and send it back to you, and you can have access to it. So if you did a workshop with 20 teams inside one organization, you could be able to look at that and then have that replayed back to you. And the hope is that we're going to do 2 things. We're going to have a look at high-level trends across the world and see what teams are saying they want to feel and not feel in the workplace, which I think will be unbelievably fascinating and eye-opening and inspiring. And number 2, we'll be able to help all the facilitators out there collect their workshop data. So Lottie, when you get asked, hey, what's common in your sessions? And you go, well, the sessions I've run, these ones, not to say it's going to be the same for yours, but you'll start to have that. And I think that'll be really fascinating for as we move forward. So I'll share that, and people can feel free to add their data, workshop data into it, because we're going to collect it for about a year or so, and then we'll be able to do something really amazing with it. But if you did want access to your actual bits, we can share that immediately with you if you start entering it.
I've found that reviewing the trends has been really valuable, because then what I can do as an external facilitator coming in, I can share trends, and because they're just trends, you're not actually you know, divulging any client secrets or anything like that.
Yeah.
But then you can, so like I'm starting to put together top tips for beating overwhelm or stuff around anxiety. So it's like an extra value add that you can have, and it's supported by the evidence of these are the trends. And like I said, I'm yet to, I don't believe there'll be a workshop I do that doesn't have overwhelmed in the top.
Yeah, cool. Well, that's a good experiment, a good hypothesis to have in our test, right? Yeah, I like it. Yeah. Hey, amazing, Lottie. I just want to say thank you again so much for being so generous and sharing all this with everybody, with the world, really. And for everybody who's watching, we'll send out the stuff. Thanks for offering to send that stuff out, Lottie. I'll get it off you, then email it out to everybody. The slides, the link to, or an example of your follow-up survey, the pre and post workshop comms that you've got. That's really amazing. And then I'll send the links to the stuff I just shared there as well. So everybody's got that and you can play with it. And the final thing I'll say, that's our second webinar. It feels like we've done lots of them now, but we've only done 2. In true co-creation fashion, it'll be amazing to hear from people on what you think the next one, what you'd want to hear, or if you've got ideas. And then I can keep that in the back of my mind as I meet and talk with everybody I meet and talk with. And if somebody pops into my mind based on that question, we could then have a discussion with them about it. One thing I'm thinking about is the connection between strengths and the emotional culture deck. That we're playing around with, maybe doing that one day. But in the meantime, if you've got ideas for what you'd want to see or learn about, please let me know. Or if you think you could share your ideas, please let me know, and we'll get back in touch. Yeah. So thanks so much, Lottie. Really, really amazing, and grateful for all your work. Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool. Okay, everybody. Thanks very much. We're right on 10 o'clock. That's perfect timing. Awesome. Yeah. Have an amazing day or night, wherever you might be, and look forward to the next one. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Bye.